Hey everyone, here. What's up? Mark Thomas. I wanted to talk to you about the key elements to a data governance program. I get a lot of questions about how data governance falls into an overall enterprise information and technology governance structure. So I thought I'd put together this short video to tell you about the things that I would do and the places that I would look if I were putting together one of these programs. Here's the question I get. Management has asked my team to put together our data governance structure and assign roles and responsibilities. Where should we start, and how do we even do this? It's very complex in the world of governance when we have multiple technologies. We have a lot of different regulatory concerns, legal concerns around data and privacy. So let's jump in and talk about what I would do in this case. But first, I always love to have a little cartoon that describes one of my biggest concerns right here. And that is there's a difference between data, information, and knowledge. Notice over there on the left, data. This is in this big vault. And companies spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, protecting this data. These are X's and O's and pluses and minuses and pieces of information that if one piece of this gets compromised, we freak out. What would you do if you found a note card on the floor that said 1,967? What does that mean to you? Well, if you put that number with somebody's name and year of birth, now you have information. Information is where you take these multiple pieces of data, you put those together, and that information is useful and provides value if it becomes knowledge. Now look over on the right where that's knowledge. Think about this productivity report that we're looking at here on the far right-hand side. That is a culmination of putting information together that requires multiple pieces of data. So you have to think about your governance and management tasks through this whole life cycle. I want to give you a real quick history of my perception of data governance over the last several centuries. So hang on a second. We used to use stone tablets to do this, right? We put data and we put information on these tablets. It was great. This wasn't going anywhere and it would be around for millennium. However, we got smarter. And over the years, we continue to get smarter, so we put this information now on scrolls. There are some challenges here that you have to go through the entire scroll to find the area that has the information that you're looking for. So our solution to this was now to index that information. And that index, we use some type of, in this case, the alphabet, or you could use a numbering system for that information. But we still had some challenges, and we continued to get smarter. So now we started to digitize this information, and you might remember the old punch cards. But what was great about this is it kept information digitally, but we had to have a medium, which was still a piece of paper. And then we got smart. We had to put this information now on this type of media here, but this started to create some vulnerability. So we got a little smarter. And now we put this information in data centers, where now I'm expecting my data center operations team to actually manage and protect that data, because people want that information and we had to get smarter. But our customers and our users and consumers of that information wanted more, and they wanted it now. So we gave them the opportunity to access that information from multiple devices. And we got even smarter. We put it all on the internet now. So you've got software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. I can get access to my information from anything or any device from anywhere. This is great stuff, but here's the challenge. We're still governing that information and data like we were when we put this on stone tablets. My whole point of this introduction is we have evolved digitally. Why haven't we also evolved our data governance structures as well? Before we jump into some of the suggestions I have, let's talk about the data and information lifecycle next. In this information lifecycle, of course, there have been countless arguments and discussions between organizations that are trying to figure out the difference. For the purposes of this presentation, data, like I mentioned before, X's and O's and pluses and minuses, that represents a fact. It comes in a lot of different forms, text, numbers, and so on. Now, once you put those pieces of data together, it becomes information. That has context to it. And so there's meaning to that. And if that information is usable we can now say it creates value, which goes to the overall information life cycle next. If you look at the information life cycle, as we've mentioned up to this point, what we see here is you have at the top business processes and IT processes. What they're doing is they're generating information and data. They're generating this stuff. Once we generate that data, we transform that into information, as we mentioned before, which again transforms into knowledge. And it should be creating value for the enterprise, and therefore we can continually improve how we govern that flow. A couple of key roles here. We have the information producer, custodian, consumer. There are multiple other roles within the data governance and data management realm. We'll talk about those again in a few minutes. But when we want to control this information and we want to control that life cycle, remember there's a separation or a distinction between governance and management. Look over on the left, we have governance. That's where we provide oversight, things like our policies and those types of things. On the execution, we have several areas. Let's jump through them very quickly so you understand the different levels or the different areas at which you would govern data. First, we have evaluate, direct, and monitor on the governance side. What this is really doing is establishing and exercising authority and control over the management of data assets. Notice that is coming from what we call the DMBOK, the data management body of knowledge. Over on the management side, first we have plan. What you need to do is understand the information, use the value, and associated classification and architectures. You will then design this where you have standards and definitions around your architecture, your collection, access, storage, and your metadata. We'll cover that again soon. In build and acquire, you create records, you purchase that information, and you may be loading external information, and then you use it. Information is held either electronically or in hard copy, and it's made available to the organization so the organization can accomplish its enterprise goals. You monitor this information, the resource continues to create value, and then finally you dispose of that. You transfer it, you retain it, or you destroy it, because remember, information is valuable, but at a certain point it may become a liability to you. Time to talk about a few of my key considerations here. There are some areas I think are real important to consider when you're putting together your systems and your programs. And these 10 key practices are areas that I would focus on if I were you and I was putting together a data governance program. This information, it's important to note here that it comes from the COBIT framework, and that's what we're going to be talking about here in just a second. You can find this information in the Governance and Management Objectives publication. Of course, that's out on isaka.org, and go to the COBIT site for that. So first, let's talk define and communicate the data management strategy, roles and responsibilities. Absolutely huge. This is where you define how to manage and improve your data assets in line with the enterprise's strategy and objectives. You're communicating this strategy to all stakeholders, and most importantly, you're assigning roles and responsibilities to ensure that the data is managed as critical assets and the data management strategy is implemented and maintained in a sustainable manner. Next, we have define and maintain a consistent business glossary. You're going to create, approve, update, and promote consistent terms and definitions so you can foster shared data usage across the entire organization. Next, you establish the process and the infrastructure for metadata management. We're talking about specifying and extending metadata about the organization's data assets, and we're fostering and supporting data sharing, of course, ensuring compliant use of that data. We're improving our responsiveness to business changes, and of course, reducing data-related risks. In the data quality strategy, we're defining an integrated organization-wide strategy to achieving and maintaining that level of data quality, such as, say, complexity, integrity, and so on, so we can support the business meeting its objectives. In establishing data profiling methodologies, processes, and tools, you would implement standardized data profiling methodologies, those practices, tools, and the templates that can be applied across multiple data repositories and data stores. Your data quality assessment approach is a systematic approach to measure and evaluate your data quality. Of course, that's according to processes and techniques, and against data quality rules that you might have. In the cleansing approach, we're looking at the mechanisms, the rules, the processes, and the methods to validate and correct data according to your predefined business rules. The life cycle of data assets. I think it's important here to understand, map, and inventory and control the data flows throughout the business processes. Data archiving and retention, making sure that data maintenance satisfies your organization and even your regulatory requirements for availability of historical data. And finally, manage data backup and restore arrangements, where you're managing the availability of critical data to ensure that you have operational continuity here. There are many other areas to consider when you're looking at the adoption of your data governance strategy. Of course, processes. Not only the process that we're talking about now around data governance and data management, but what other processes are affected by this process. Of course, your measurement system and your key performance indicators to measure the health of the process, any policies or procedures required for this. Organizational structures is very important here because it identifies the decision-making bodies, the levels of authority, the escalation procedures, and those types of things. The risk scenarios. That risk scenario is an event that, if it occurs, has some impact on the business meeting its objectives. Information artifacts. We have information flows that come into and out of the process that governs data. You have your IT services. Of course, you can find those in your IT services catalog. You have your technologies, which might include applications, infrastructure, and then finally, very, very important, the roles, the knowledge, skills, and the competencies and abilities of the people working in that process. How do you adopt this? You want to take an incremental approach to the adoption of data governance. So, of course, when you're putting this strategy together, you should always make sure you're aligning with the business strategy, because the goals and objectives of the business are driving how, where, and what you are governing down at the data level. So, of course, you look at a charter statement. That charter statement might be for, say, a data governance committee or something like that. Look at other frameworks. I have those coming up in a few minutes. Roles and accountabilities is huge. What are the responsibilities, accountabilities of different roles that are involved in the data governance strategy? You need to have an adoption roadmap, of course, operational plan. Let's jump into what I think would be a reasonable adoption methodology for looking at data governance. Okay, first we have identify organizational drivers. Now you want to look at things like pain points or trigger events. This is the reason why we're putting this strategy into place. And we want to ensure that we are looking at continuous improvement, because this is a continuous state. You are never done implementing governance over data, right? What are your legal, regulatory, or privacy requirements, things like GDPR and those things? And then make sure you understand risk appetite and tolerance levels. This is important. This comes from the highest levels of your enterprise, and it helps me understand the limits at which I can make decisions based on the appetite levels of the organization. Next, you understand the current state. When I say design factors, these are things like your goals cascade, your risk areas, role of IT, and those types of things. We select the appropriate processes, practices, and activities. Again, there may be multiple processes involved in creating your data governance strategy. Do an initial assessment. And of course, that current state, you identify where you are, you put a stake in the ground, and then you determine, hey, where is it that we want to be next? This is pretty basic. Performance and conformance with business needs helps me determine what levels of maturity or capabilities I need to be at and determine the desired level. Of course, recognize those gaps, conduct any program project planning, put those projects together. Of course, a cost-benefit analysis is very important. And really the most important part of this implementation is make sure you're doing this on a continuous basis. This is an iterative process. Like I mentioned before, you're never complete implementing governance over your data program, and create your reporting structures, those types of things out there. So I know that was quick identification of the adoption methodology, but it really, really is difficult to stay on track with that, especially when you're a large organization or you're even a small organization trying to move fast. Let's walk into my conclusion. Back in COBIT 5, we had what was called the COBIT 5 for Information Enabler Guide. Now, that is really cool. A lot of the information that you'll find on the life cycle of information comes from that guide. But the governance and management objectives in COBIT 2019 are huge for you. We just showed you a little bit of information that comes from that. You've got the data management body of knowledge, multiple NIST publications out there, too many for us to list on this. Of course, you have ITIL, ISO publications, the CIS, CSC, security controls, CMMI, data management maturity model, ISF, and of course, SFIA, the skills framework for the information age for different roles. Of course, there are several others out there. Those are the places I would go to if I were putting this together. All right, so conclusions on this. Make sure you understand the difference between data and information, because you may be controlling data differently than you control information, because information now is used to create value. Speaking of value, what creates value to the stakeholders of the enterprise? This sounds like a broken record, but don't focus on those areas of data governance that absolutely don't provide value. Now, of course, you have to make sure that you're managing the risks, but focus on what's important to those stakeholders, and a principled approach is very, very key. A principled approach gives you an overarching set of guidelines that helps you define and manage your program and use these industry frameworks. A lot of work and a lot of research has been put in on these, so I think it's very important for you to consider using those. Folks, I hope this has been helpful for you. Mark Thomas here. If you want to follow me or get more information out there on the information or governance in general, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks, everyone.